OCO, and welcome to the Cherokee Phoenix Breakdown. I am Tyler Thomas, the Executive Editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, and I am honored to be joined by Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr., as well as TulsaPeople Magazine Digital Editor and member of the Editorial Board of the Cherokee Phoenix, Tim Landes. This is a special episode of the Cherokee Phoenix Breakdown as it is dedicated to us in celebration of National Newspaper Week. In this episode, Chief Hoskin, Mr. Landes, and I will discuss the importance of a free press, why fair coverage of the government is critical to keeping citizens informed and engaged, why storytelling is so important in the mission of keeping the culture of the Cherokee people alive and well, and the extension of the Cherokee Phoenix's free subscription program in 2023. Chief Hoskin, Mr. Landes, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be with you, Tyler, and good to see Tim Landes.
Good to see you, Chief.
All right. In regards to a free press, Walter Cronkite once said that freedom of the press is not just important to democracy, it is democracy. Mahatma Gandhi said, freedom of the press is a precious privilege that no country can forego. The freedom of the press is so important that the founders of the United States ensured its protection by including it in the First Amendment in the Constitution. The Cherokee Nation also recognized its importance of being the first Native American tribe to pass a legislative act establishing an independent press. Chief Hoskin, your father was on the council when that legislation was passed in 2000, and you yourself have been on council or in the role of Secretary of State or in your present role as Principal Chief when amended versions have been passed and signed. Why was it so important for the tribe in 2000 to pass the act, and why does this act still carry the importance today for citizens of the Cherokee Nation?
Well, it's important because the Cherokee Nation is a democracy. And if you go back to the functioning of our government back to the 19th century, when we really needed to communicate well among ourselves as citizens, communicate with our government, and communicate to the outside world, you saw how important that democracy was. I mean, the reason that the Cherokee Nation was able to, I think, stand its ground so firmly for so long before removal is because we had a vibrant democracy. The people were speaking through their leaders. And one way to do that, of course, was through the Cherokee Phoenix, the nation's oldest newspaper in Indian country, which of course still operates today. I think in the modern era, you have to have some legal protections for that, particularly in the context of an Indian nation where there's certainly plenty of media around. I mean, we're situated near the Tulsa media market. And so you have that regional coverage of both print and video, news media, you have radio. Certainly, social media is ubiquitous in terms of its presence throughout society. But having a dedicated tribal newspaper that is structured legally apart from the tribal government, apart from the direct public relations or communications arm, is important because it allows there to be some scrutiny, some level of review, and really a mediating institution so that citizens can speak out, whether it's a letter to the editor, whether it's commenting on the Cherokee Phoenix social media page, or whether it's just reading those stories and then having conversations. That's so important. You can't really just rely on the mainstream media for that to happen. And so embedding within Cherokee law both the resources for a newspaper, but also again some legal protections to keep the newspaper apart from the government is important. And as we know, under the Cherokee Nation Free Press Act, there is an independent editorial board that exercises this degree of editorial control. There's other protections we added to the law over the years to protect sources of information for people that are doing reporting in Cherokee Nation. That's still important. And I think as time goes by, it behooves us to sort of look occasionally at our free press law to see if there's ways that we can improve it. But I would say now Cherokee Nation remains a vibrant democracy in large measure because we've had the good sense, and this isn't just about one chief or one council. Lots of chiefs and lots of councils have agreed that this is a good thing, and we ought to celebrate it.
Mr. Landes, as a journalist, how much pride do you take in your role as a member of the editorial board in regards to being a protector of the independent press for the Cherokee people?
I take a lot of pride in my role in serving on the editorial board for the Cherokee Phoenix Because it's a paper that I've grown up reading, is an information source that I understand how vitally important it is. Any newspaper, media outlet, or anything, to have a successful community, tribe, democracy, you have to have an independent, free press. And so I feel the importance of that, and I take great pride in being able to take part in making sure that that happens for the Cherokee Phoenix.
Chief Hoskin, you mentioned a little bit ago, but when you were on council, in addition to the Independent Press Act, you co-authored a legislative act titled the Free Press Protection and Journalistic Shield Act of 2012. The purpose of the act was to affirm the independence of a free press in the Cherokee Nation by providing protection of journalistic sources and information from disclosure in any Cherokee Nation proceeding. Why did you believe more was needed legislatively in regards to protecting and affirming the Independent Press Act?
You know, if you look around the world, one of the hallmarks of a free press is to protect the rights of journalists to engage in journalism, and that sometimes involves seeking out sources and offering those sources some degree of protection. In some cases, anonymous sources are the best sourcing you can do for a particular story. I think if you're a journalist, and of course there's journalistic standards, you don't just take one person's word for it and do a front page story. If a journalist is meeting those standards of journalism and going out and getting as many sources as possible, sometimes there is a need to protect sources, particularly when we're talking about reporting on the actions of a government. And again, you can go around the world and you can hear about political leaders who will declare that journalists are the enemy of the state. I mean, those are really troubling things. But here in the 21st century, that kind of rhetoric still gets thrown around. And of course, worse than that, actual attacks on journalism, both in a metaphorical sense and in some cases a real sense. But the Journalism Shield provision said essentially that we can protect both the journalist and the source from some sort of action against them by the government, and not have to disclose their source, perhaps risk the source. And I'm not just talking about sort of physical harm. I'm talking about just sort of reputational risk when a source says, this is information I have and I want to share it. If we lack those protections, you can imagine a world in which a journalist might fear publishing a story because they know they're going to have to out their source. This particular piece of legislation really came up because at the time, some staff of the Cherokee Phoenix were interested in it. I don't know that there was a particular concern that the Cherokee Nation government was taking some sort of untoward action towards a journalist. But I think it's one of those things, like I said earlier, from time to time, we need to think about how we can strengthen our laws. And I think that's what it was born of. And I was happy to just get behind that effort.
Mr. Landes, as a journalist, how important is it for citizens to be able to have journalists operate without fear of political interference or censorship?
It's vitally important. It's one of the most important things that we have in journalism. I mean, if you look at the US Constitution, the first thing that comes up is a freedom of speech and a freedom of the press. I mean, it is before weapons or anything. I mean, the voice and the press are two of the most vitally important things to a democracy. So when it comes to tribal politics, it's a smaller venue. You're in a tighter area, people are going to know each other. There could be fear there could be bullying. Politicians can say what they want. With journalists, you have to be able to vet your sources, find the information, and share the honest truth at all times. That is our mission. That is our goal. And so you can't be afraid of political interference or censorship, and neither should those that, like Chief Hoskin was just speaking about. When it's sources, if you see something, say something, you have to be able to trust that the journalists will take your word and do the right thing by it. So all those things are vitally important.
Chief Hoskin, do you believe any other protections are needed for the free press in Cherokee Nation, or do you believe through the tribe's current laws and the First Amendment of the United States that appropriate safeguards are in place for the independent press here?
Well, I think those of us in elected office have to be open-minded about it and acknowledge, at least for those of us that aren't professional journalists, that there may be things we don't know that need
Yeah.
to be done in terms of enhancing the law. I'd say where I stand right now, I'm very proud of the statute that we have, and I think it offers the kind of protection that you would want in any Indian country newspaper. So I'm open to it, but I think right now, just like any set of laws, in the case of the editorial board, any editorial board structure and any political structure, ultimately we're only as good as those who are exercising the duties or enforcing the law. And so I think those of us on the government side need to understand that the law it does exist, and it ought to be enforced even against us if we were to run afoul of it. People like Tim Landes who give their time to serve on an editorial board, I know they take it very serious, and I think that helps enhance the law. Even if you don't change the law, you're utilizing the law. So I think right now the statutory structure is sound, but again, we have to be vigilant and enforce it and recognize it and respect it.
Yeah. Let's transition our focus of our discussion to the importance of a fair and transparent coverage of the government and its role in keeping citizens informed and engaged. Mr. Landis, simply, can you state how fair and transparent coverage is so important to not only keeping citizens informed, but engaged with their government and democratic processes?
I keep saying it. It's vitally important. I mean, it's you can't get any more simple than that. But it's just you have to have that. I mean, you have to have someone in the room who doesn't have an agenda and is willing to share with what occurred. I often view journalists as the first, especially journalists covering live events and such and political. They are your first level of historians. They are there to document what occurred that day that we can look back on and study later. That's my belief. And so I feel like if you are fair and transparent at the very beginning, it only sets things forward in motion down the road. But yes, you have to be fair and transparent. So you have to be fair and transparent when covering it, because it sheds light on any things that are going wrong in the community, or if there's any corruption or anything else there. So yes, it's vitally important.
Yeah. Chief Hoskin, as Secretary of State now Chief, you have had interaction with many, many other Native tribes. From your experience, can you quantify the impact the free press laws of the Cherokee Nation have on our tribe compared to tribes without a free press protection?
Well, it may be difficult to quantify, but you sort of know it when you see it. And having traveled around Indian country, I've talked to everyday citizens and current and former public officials of other tribes, and there's a real difference. And I think particularly for citizens, having some sense that other than sort of your own effort as a citizen to investigate, it's really difficult to do, and to sort of sort through what you see on social media, that's difficult to do. Having a newspaper that sort of says, this is what happened, as Tim Landes said, they're sort of on the front row seat of history and they report it in real time. I think having that makes a big difference. I think it makes for a better informed citizenry. I think there are some societies around the world, and possibly even some tribal societies, tribal governments that are more closed off. In the long run, I don't think that's healthy for any government. And again, this is happening around the world. We ought to think, as we're thinking about Newspaper Week, we ought to think about the world of journalism and why that's really a fragile thing around the world. And in some parts of the world, it's just not there. It doesn't exist. And I think that is not the mark of a free society. But I think Cherokee people should take pride in knowing that we have this really robust democracy. And those of us that are in elected office, sometimes we're on the receiving end of that democracy, because sometimes democracy can be rough. But it's rough from a rhetorical standpoint. And that's good. That's sort of the beauty of democracy. It's the substitute for what we see in other parts of the world, where people that are suppressed or they don't have a transparency in order to access their government and understand what goes on, eventually that comes out in all sorts of ways that can be particularly unhealthy. It can even in some parts of the world be violent. But here, when we're saying the worst that happens is I might have a bad day in the media, that's okay. That's what we're here for. And I think that tribes around the country can look at Cherokee Nation and say, that's a good standard to meet. They've got a newspaper that covers things month in and month out. They have a social media presence. There's a right for citizens to speak out. That I think is healthy, and I think people see that. And how you quantify that, I'm not sure, other than that it's just inherently good.
Yeah. Chief, you could say that the Cherokee Nation, the leaders that were in place in 2000 when this was passed, learned from Cherokee Nation history itself. In 1828 and then the early 1830s, you saw a difference in opinion of Chief Ross and Elias Boudinot when it came to removal, and that led to Elias Boudinot resigning from that position because of political influence there.
Right.
And then in the 90s, you had certain things that came up as well that kind of led to this Free Press Act or Independent Press Act. So can you kind of speak to that and learning from history and growing and making things right within the statutes so that we do have that independent press?
Yeah, I mean, I think that reflects the kind of democracy the Cherokee Nation is. We do better when we collectively know better. And certainly in the 19th century, as you saw things transpire, you actually did see violence as a substitute for political debate. I mean, you really did in Cherokee society. And that probably was a wake-up call for the Cherokee people in terms of what role this mediating institution of the Cherokee Phoenix should play in our lives and what sort of independence it should have. And I think as you move forward into the 90s and some of the difficulties there politically, I think helped inform what policymakers, chiefs, and councils thought in the last part of the 20th century when we enacted the Free Press Act. You hope there's no further tension or disruption that has to be the way we learn a lesson, but it could happen. And I hope we're responsible enough that if something does go wrong, that our response is to improve the laws, not to sort of push it away as if there's not a problem. But one thing's for sure, we have set a standard in the past few decades that when citizens do feel like they're not getting their voice heard, the response has been to improve the law. And I think if we continue to sort of have that mindset, that's sort of the culture of Cherokee thinking around free speech and free press, I think we'll be in good shape no matter who's in office, because people expect that. And as long as we meet those expectations, I think we'll be okay.
Mr. Landes, you live in Tulsa and interact with several different tribes in various capacities. What are the biggest differences you have observed between how different tribal media outlets operate?
Well, first off, I'm proud to say that the Cherokee Phoenix leads the way, and it's not only because we're nearly 200 years old, but it's also because of the great leadership that we have in you and our staff and veteran journalists like Will and others who have been continuing to do great work for decades. And so you have that foundation that others don't. The Muskogee Nation just a year ago, their citizens passed a constitutional amendment creating a Freedom of the Press Act. So we are just now kind of seeing Muskogee media kind of rise, and they've just had a year to really do their thing. As far as Osage News goes, they've had laws in place for a long time to protect journalists, and I say a long time, within the last 14, 15 years or so. They continue to do their thing in Pawhuska. I have, going back to Muskogee Nation, they're now getting into podcasting and stuff. And I have a good relationship with Jason Salzman, their press secretary, who's worked in the press there for a long time in the Muskogee Nation. But I would say that, our tribe, I'm proud to say again, is leading the way. But it's cool to see the other tribes coming along. Plus, we have other outlets that you're seeing kind of come out of some independent journalists and stuff in Native news. So that's cool to see as well.
Moving from legislative protections and fair and transparent coverage to the importance of the role of storytelling has on the promotion of Cherokee Nation's people and culture. When the paper was established in 1828, one of the main purposes of the publication was to promote the Cherokee people to the non-natives in hopes of gaining favor and prevent the removal from their homelands. Although the mission of promoting the people was successful, the non-native audience was made aware of the many successes of the Cherokees. The goal of preventing removal was unfortunately not achieved. Today, we continue the mission of promoting our history and culture, language and heritage, as well as spotlighting the successes of our Cherokee people around the world through our publication. Chief Hoskin, what impact does this mission have on the Cherokee Nation and its citizens?
It really lifts up the Cherokee people. There's such amazing things going on among our people, all walks of life, all ages, both within the reservation and at large. As you all know, we're the largest tribe in the country, and we have Cherokees all over the country. It would be, if it was just left to the mainstream media to sort of examine those wonderful stories, there would be very little told, because it would get, I think, lost in the larger landscape of the region, of the state, of the country. But having a tribal newspaper that focuses on personal interest stories, that focuses on success of young people in particular, that gives, a voice to people who might otherwise be in relative anonymity. And so I think people look forward to reading the Cherokee Phoenix every month, in part, not just because of the sort of the politics and the government reporting, this is very good, but because they get to read about someone that maybe reminds them of their grandchild, or is their grandchild, or something going on in a community that's really exciting, that strengthens a community that otherwise might not make the 10 o'clock news, might not make a major newspaper, but it makes the Cherokee Phoenix. And I think it instills the Cherokee people with a degree of pride, knowing that a newspaper like the Cherokee Phoenix, which can be read all over the world and has a broad readership, is validating what they're doing in maybe a little tiny corner of the world that the rest of the world just forgot about. But the Cherokee Phoenix didn't forget about them or where they live.
Yeah, and Mr. Landes mentioned how journalists sometimes chronicle history, and to I guess a larger extent, we're the first lines of the historians, as Mr. Landes said. And one of the things that of recent coverage that the Cherokee Phoenix had, and like you said, that wouldn't probably not make the 6 o'clock news or the Tulsa World or whoever it may be in this region, is we covered the 100-year-old veteran that you honored at Cherokee National Holiday. It's an amazing story, but like you said, it may not hit a newspaper if the Cherokee Phoenix wasn't covering it.
That's true. And sometimes I think about the fact that I see the Phoenix covering a story like that, and you are able to explore her Cherokee culture. This is the 100-year-old veteran. Or even Dwight Birdwell, who was also recognized as having received a Medal of Honor. I mean, I read a story about Dwight Birdwell, and there was actually no mention. It was a national story about his Cherokee roots, or just a marginal reference. But the Cherokee Phoenix can really hone in on the Cherokee-ness of a story that the mainstream media might not cover, it might not occur to them to cover. So there's a depth there that we get from the Phoenix that we otherwise would be missing.
Yeah. Mr. Landes, as a journalist who does storytelling through both the written word as well as podcasting, explain for us how you approach storytelling and what you hope your works accomplish.
My approach is basically that everyone has a story to tell. Everybody has a story, and there's something interesting there. It's just finding that thing. And for me, a lot of my work, I focus on social issues. So things like homelessness or mental health or, drug addiction, those things. So oftentimes I'm trying to give a voice to someone who doesn't really have a platform. I spend a lot of time talking to people experiencing homelessness, or the people in nonprofits or in service agencies who work with these people to help kind of lift them up, and one, shed a light on things they're doing, raise awareness, and to also, to bring stories to light. And sometimes they're happy stories and positive stories about artists and stuff, but there's stuff within that is, whether it's generational trauma that's driving their artwork, or there's a bigger story that they're trying to tell through that. I just am one step in that piece to connect people to the story and to that person.
Yeah. How do you, as a Cherokee Nation citizen, believe the stories like that the Cherokee Phoenix covers and give voice to? What's the impact for other citizens being able to see how fellow citizens are achieving successes and doing multiple things or various things from in variety of areas around the world? What kind of impact does that have?
It's a huge impact because, for example, use Roy Boney, who works in the Cherokee Nation Language Department. He is also a comic book artist who, is able to do Marvel comic book covers. And we at the Phoenix just recently had a story about this. And I've been getting them in the mail every few months that he produces a new one, which is so cool. But the thing about it is that anybody can read that story. A grandma can read that story and hand it to her grandson who's 8 and just aspiring to draw Spider-Man or whatever, and say, look, here's a Cherokee artist who is doing this incredible thing that you probably would have never dreamed you could do. And we see that across the board, whether it's in business, it's in government, it's in the arts. By telling those stories, it inspires and motivates others to do the thing that they feel they want to do, and they see that there is a possibility to do it. And now we're seeing it with an emerging film industry. We're seeing it with music. It's just the times are phenomenal for things to cover and then share those stories and inspire the next generation, and even people who are maybe older thinking, I want to do that thing. So, that to me is one of the most beautiful things about sharing these stories is it empowers the community to we can all do this.
Yeah. Chief Hoskin, piggybacking on that a little bit, in 2022 alone, the paper has covered people from Wilma Mankiller to Mary Golda Ross to authors to professional athletes to students attending some of the country's most esteemed learning institutions. I'm 33 years old. I don't recall seeing so many Cherokee Nation citizens' stories of success when I was a youth. You have just a few years on me, but so I'm going to assume it was probably much the same for you growing up as well. What do you hope the promotion of these stories mean for the generations coming?
Well, what I hope it does is puts heroes in front of young people. And I had the same experience that you did, Tyler, growing up, just not hearing a whole lot about Cherokee citizens achieving these great successes. And it wasn't that they weren't, it was that there wasn't as much coverage, or maybe the coverage was of the person, but didn't explore her Cherokee roots or the Cherokee-ness of her community. And that's missing. And I think if we want our young people to aspire to be Mary Golda Ross and help, take the space program into the next level, we've got to explain who that is, and not only someone that's as historically significant as Mary Golda Ross, but there's a lot of contemporary people that are working in science, or take it outside of science, take it into the entertainment industry, examining people who are Cherokee that have made it big or are making it big right now. You can go through a range of professions, artistic endeavors, civic engagement, whether it's politics or some other form of public service. And there's lots of stories to tell. And I think the more our young people see that, the old saying, you can't be what you can't see. Well, we want them to be successful professionals, but don't we also want them to be successful Cherokee professionals? Don't we want them to see themselves as not just the next great business leader, but the next great Cherokee business leader or entertainer or teacher or scientist, or just go across the board? I think that means this generation coming up is instilled with more pride and really a better identity, perhaps, than those of us that came before them had, or a stronger identity, I should say. And we can thank in large measure the coverage of the Cherokee Phoenix for that.
I'm going to shift now to discussing our 2023 continuation of an innovative partnership between the Cherokee Phoenix and your administration, Chief Hoskin, and how we're going to continue the Cherokee Nation Free Phoenix for All program in 2023 for the citizens who opt in to the program through the Gadugi portal. Deadline is November 30th for that opt-in. Chief Hoskin, this program was developed and implemented in 2021 with the mission of providing citizens access to relevant, factual, and timely information regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you speak to the development of the program and the success of it?
Well, Deputy Chief and I were happy to work with you and with the council on making sure we could undertake this effort. And this is what people should understand, is the Cherokee Phoenix is an independent newspaper. Citizens are interested in it. And I think we've talked all during this program about how impactful that is. How accessible is it? And how can people access it and get it in their mailbox? Well, that Free Phoenix for All program was very successful, and it put a Phoenix in the mailbox of, I would say, Tyler, every Cherokee citizen, probably over the age of maybe 16, 18, I can't recall the cutoff, but essentially every household had one. And I can tell you, having traveled across the reservation and across the country, there was a great appreciation for this, because a lot of folks maybe got access to the Phoenix for the first time. Maybe they'd let their subscription lapse and they remembered why they were a subscriber in the first place. To be able to continue it on is important. And I appreciate the way it's structured this time, is that people have to opt in and ask for it. but the response has been very good. Ultimately, what this comes down to, though, Tyler, is that the Cherokee Phoenix is very unique. It is not like any other newspaper or media outlet that covers anything to do with Cherokee Nation. It is uniquely Cherokee. I think the Cherokee people want to access it. Certainly, my administration, the deputy chief, and the council could choose any number of ways to say, let's get behind with some resources, information out to the people. And we do that in lots of ways. The reason we chose the Phoenix, because the Phoenix is so unique. It's so rooted in our history. And let's face it, the Cherokee Phoenix can spend all of its time sort of scouring the landscape for all sorts of stories that need to be told. It's the Phoenix's full-time job to do that. You do it so well, rather than just sort of send out, which I think are informative, just press releases to everybody from my office. You won't get the full story that way. You get the full story if you have the Cherokee Phoenix coming to your mailbox, and Cherokee citizens can access this program again and keep the Phoenix coming. And I think that's good for everyone.
Yeah. Chief, can you kind of speak to how this program is funded and through this partnership?
Right. Well, we are funding it through the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that we have received to do lots of different things in the Cherokee Nation. I mean, we probably could devote a whole program to how those funds are being spent, from massive capital projects to the direct financial assistance to Cherokee citizens. But as you mentioned earlier, the impetus for this was to make sure we could get information to the Cherokee people during the pandemic. And so that's why that American Rescue Plan Act, which is responsive to the COVID-19 pandemic, was appropriate to use for this effort, because whether it's public health information, Tyler, or whether it's information about various support programs for people recovering from COVID economically, those things are all important. And to get that information in front of people, nobody does it better than the Phoenix. And continuing that on this year is important, because even though I think we're entering this new phase of the public health crisis and we're just sort of learning to live with COVID and keep people safe, there's still vital information out there that needs to be shared. And again, the Phoenix is really the most effective way to do it. So those funds, I think, are just so well spent getting a Phoenix in the mailbox of every Cherokee household.
Mr. Landes, as a member of the editorial board, and I'm going to toot our paper's own horn here, you're a member of the editorial board for a paper that was a finalist for the Great Plains Newspaper of the Year Award, a seven-time winner at this year's Naja Awards banquet. So how happy are you that the Cherokee Phoenix was able to meet this need during the pandemic, and what kind of value are people getting whenever they get this paper in the mail?
First, real quick, I just want to say for viewers who maybe don't know, NAJA is the Native American Journalists Association, and the Great Plains Journalism Awards cover a region spanning from Nebraska to Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri. So not just Oklahoma. I mean, the Cherokee Phoenix is was recognized as one of the best papers in this part of America. And so that is huge. I have been reading the Phoenix for over 20 years. And so to see where it is today, it makes me so excited to receive that recognition, but also that it's landing in more mailboxes than ever. At a time when journalism and media companies are shrinking, they're watching distribution go down, we get to see the Phoenix numbers rise and hit mailboxes and inform people at one of the most critical times in that we've had in a long time. And to point out the fact that the Cherokee population rivals that of Oklahoma City, that of Tulsa, and then we have a newspaper with a circulation that's probably bigger than both those, I would guess, today, which is saying a lot. And we have citizens spanning the globe. And so for them to be able to get a paper that has been run through the editorial process by award-winning journalists, and they're getting the truth in their mailbox, there's nothing that excites me more than that.
Chief Hoskin, is there anything more you'd like to offer before we end our discussion today?
All I'll say is Newspaper Week certainly worth celebrating. The Cherokee Phoenix is worth celebrating. And as we mentioned at the top of the conversation, it's really about democracy. And you can't have a functioning democracy without a free exchange of ideas. The free exchange of ideas, I think, is so much more robust, so much more well-informed when you have quality media, professional journalists contributing to, the wide array of voices out there. The Cherokee Phoenix does that, and I'm just proud that that's the Cherokee Phoenix. It's something that I think all Cherokees take pride in.
Yeah. Mr. Landis, anything before we conclude?
I would just like to say that the newspaper business is a two-way street. It takes the readers and it takes the journalists. So as a reader, if you are a citizen of the tribe and you have a story you want to share, reach out to the Phoenix. Just know that, like we said, there are, so many citizens. It might take us a while to get to that story. And we're not ignoring you, because the more story tips we get, the better it is all the time. And we need to be flooded with those, because it helps us find the stories to tell in different ways. And so I just want to encourage our citizens to continue submitting your story ideas. And if you see something wrong, the reason we are a free press is that we are there to tell the story and fix things. So if you see something wrong, say something, reach out. Your confidentiality, we will take care of you. We protect you in that, and we will do the work to make sure that the story comes to light. So I just want to thank everyone who has watched this, to continue supporting journalism and support all local journalism. It is very important. Like I said earlier, it's vitally important to the strength and the success of the community. So please keep reading and send in those tips.
Yeah. Chief, Mr. Landis, thank you for joining me today and discussing the importance of a free press, why fair coverage of the government is critical to keeping citizens informed and engaged, why storytelling is so important in the mission of keeping the culture of the Cherokee people alive and well, and the extension of the Cherokee Phoenix's free subscription program in 2023. I also want to remind you to opt in for the 2023 program. You need to visit the Gadugi portal. That link is on the Cherokee Nation's website at cherokee.org. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. Go to the Gadugi portal, put in your login information, click the box on the opt-in, and then click update. It's that easy, it's that simple, and that'll continue your subscription through the next year. I also want to thank our audience for watching or listening to this episode of the Cherokee Phoenix Breakdown. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to catch our next episode. What up?
What up?
What up?